So my story to tell is actually quite a chilling one. It happened a long time ago now, and comes from a brief and yet highly disturbing encounter. Despite it being brief, it would eventually leave a long-lasting impression on me, and will likely remain the most messed up thing I've ever experienced. My story began when I was a 14-year-old boy. To give some context, I was one of those, part of a group, but not one of the group types, shy and reserved. I had friends, but not much beyond school hours. So when one of my friends wanted me to hang out with her, it made a welcome change to my quiet after-school routine of video games. We walked back to hers from school, and she invited me into her home. As I walked in, I saw whom I quickly assumed was her dad. He had his back to me, preparing food. This was the first time I'd been introduced to him, and my first impression would quickly be, putting it very mildly, not great at all. As my friend introduced me, he turned around to face me holding a large kitchen knife. Suddenly, he lurched towards me as if stumbling forward, yelling, "Whoa!" He quickly turned the knife, pushing the handle quite hard into my chest. He then smirked with the eeriest expression on his face and said, "Only joking." My heart was pounding, and inwardly, I was freaking out. While I tried to nervously laugh it off, I am sure my face clearly said otherwise. My friend just laughed it off as Dad just fooling around, and led me into the living room. But as I sat down, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling I had now. I tried to shake it off and talk to my friend, but her dad promptly entered the living room. They had music playing moderately loud on a stereo, and he cranked it to a level that sounded like a live band was playing in there with us. My friend followed him to the kitchen and soon returned. She told me she had to go to the store to get something for him, and asked if I wanted to wait for her, as it wasn't too far. Given the rather creepy encounter, my gut instinct was having none of it, and I wouldn't be ignoring it. I quickly got up and left with my friend, and we went to the store. I can't say exactly how the rest of the day went, as I can't remember, but I do know I didn't return to the house again. I wouldn't speak of what happened after that for quite some time, and just chalked it up as a really freaky interaction, locking it away in my mind. However, it wouldn't end there. He would set foot in our house a year later, dropping my friend off at a party we were having. I didn't interact with him then, though my dad did offer him a beer, and I later recalled how he just stood in the corner alone, watching everyone. I would see my friend's dad for a third time a couple years later, this time on TV, as the face of a man charged for the abduction and murder of a woman who went missing a week prior. I was stood there, right as the story broke of who he was. I'll never forget it as long as I live. Forget the sensation of my blood turning to ice in my veins. My parents later commented how they literally saw the color drain from my face in that moment. Yet in the days that followed, it only got worse. He would go on to confess while in custody to the abduction and murder of a woman who had been missing for 20 years by that point. Following corroborations of things he said previously, along with expert analysis, led the police to believe he may have actually been a prolific serial killer. He was soon probed as a potential suspect in almost a half a dozen unsolved missing person cases. However, due to lack of evidence, his involvement in these remain unclear. My mind still occasionally wanders to that first encounter. Even though his choice of victims seem to be women, I can't help but think about that music cranked up so loud. How my friend asked me if I wanted to wait for her in the house with him. If I had stayed, what would have happened to me, if anything at all? Was there any part of him that was curious, wondering about switching things up a little? Or was that knife held to my chest truly just a harmless joke of a serial killer? Several years ago, I had a very quick trip to Denver planned to visit a friend before she moved away. I was young, broke, and working a crappy entry-level job, so it was the best I could do with my one day off. I went straight from work to the airport and got into DIA around 11 p.m. I was bunking on the couch of an old college friend, and they lived about 30 to 40 minutes away from the airport. Fortunately, the light rail recently extended out to the airport, and my friend lived near the light rail line. I had taken the light rail often when living in Denver myself, but was not too familiar with the newer additions. I barely made it to the train before setting off, grateful to not have to wait around for another half hour at that time of night. It was nearing midnight when the train pulled into a brightly lit Union Station. I looked around for my connection, but it was nowhere to be found, not realizing that the connecting line was not there. Fortunately, I was able to flag down security, and they pointed me in the right direction. A few blocks away, there was another brightly lit station, separated by roughly 200 yards. Unlike the stations, there were hardly any lights, just some lights spilling in from either side where the train platform stood. I was only traveling with a backpack, so I was able to move quickly, moving out of the Union Station and towards the other platform, hoping that I was going to make my next train. As I got further away from the station, my eyes adjusted to the darkness. I noted a large figure standing in the middle of the sidewalk ahead of me. I quickly gauged my surroundings and realized there were no other paths unless I walked in the road. I decided to keep on the path and do my best to come across with a "I see you and I'm not scared" attitude. As I drew closer, I could make out a tall, muscular man, probably in his 20s or 30s. As I got closer, I made eye contact to let him know that I recognized his presence, and he was already staring right at me, mumbling to himself. As I passed by him, I could hear what he was mumbling. He was not speaking to me, but instead he was speaking about me. And as I walked past him, he began to follow me. I began to walk fast, and he began to walk faster. All the while, he was saying things like, "Oh, look at that body. She's so fine. I want to feel that body," along with other sexual and crude comments about me, all being muttered to himself. The second station was still another 100 yards or so away, and there was nowhere I could go in between. I pulled out my cell phone and rang my dad, desperate for him to answer. The call went to voicemail, but I pretended he had picked up. As soon as I began talking, the man spoke to me for the first time and said, "Oh girl, I didn't mean you no harm," and the footsteps faded. I kept up the fake conversation for a moment longer before looking back, and he was nowhere to be found. Like I mentioned previously, I looked around for places I could escape and couldn't find any. I am confident with his size, if he had done anything, I wouldn't have stood a chance. I burst into the light of the station, barely made my train, and ultimately missed my stop because I was so shaken up and had to ride the train back around. I finally rested my head on the pillow in my friend's house around 2 a.m., never to travel alone at night. And whoever the disappearing man in the street was, let's never meet again. This is so bizarre. This isn't even a memory I forgot, just one I basically turned into my own fun antidote to make it less scary. 11 years later, it's fucking scary, and I know how lucky I was. For context, I was a fresh 21-year-old and had recently rediscovered the love of dance and started enjoying concerts and festivals. I had attended my first festival at 20 and had the most amazing time volunteering and meeting people. It was a last minute and unexpected situation that first year, but after the amazing experience I had, I was hooked. It's prudent to add that I was extremely naive and obviously new to this kind of scene. So the next year, I had cut off the friends I had gone to the festivals with before, but still had friends of other friends that went that I got along with very well and had good memories with. So even though I was going to my second year at the same festival, I was going solo and just camping with friends of friends, which I suppose was the beginning of the problem. I got going kinda late, so when I got to the festival, the lines to get in were extremely long. I packed diligently, but the phone service wasn't great and I had a hard time contacting the semi-friends that I was camping with. By the time I had found them and had set up, it was dark. It was newer, but a pretty large festival, and I really have a bad sense of direction. In the future years, I learned to bring a battery or solar lights and obnoxious decorations because of the night. It was also in a different location that year, so unfamiliar with where I camped with my surroundings. My ex-roommate Tom and his girlfriend Gina were the ones I was closest to, and Tom was bringing some special acid for me as kind of an apology for not sticking up for me in a roommate situation. We all went to the first show together, but all got really high so fast. I took too much and knew it pretty quickly, so I knew the night was going to go sideways. But by the time I realized, Tom and Gina had wandered off, leaving me completely alone. I tried to find my way to my tent, thinking I'd lay down for a bit and be okay, but I couldn't remember how to get there or where it was. It was dark, and I was starting to panic, being that I was high as shit and didn't know where anyone I knew was, didn't know how to find my campsite or anything. I was in a crop top and jean shorts in the high desert at nighttime, so it started to get cold. I wandered over to the disco area because it was the first thing I found, had a legit disco ball and all. I wandered around and see this woman in the most unusual clothing, think almost pioneer, so I went to talk to her. I generally to this day don't know if this person was real, that's how messed up I was. We ended up wandering around. Again, not sure if this was a real person or a hallucination, trying to find my campsite when we reached the RV camp area. This man, maybe in his early 30s, with glow sticks, asked me if I want any, and we say, yeah. She goes first, and as soon as it's on her wrist, she skips away. I call out to her to wait, but she doesn't stop. The man looks at me and says, "Are you okay? Do you think you can find your friend?" I stupidly say, "Oh, I don't know her really. I can't find my campsite, and she was helping me, but oh well." He responds with, "You remind me a lot of my little sister. I wouldn't want you running around lost like this. Look, my buddy and I are gonna watch some shows, and I wouldn't feel right leaving you, so you can stay in his RV for a few hours." Obviously, I was too high, too young, too naive to see where this all would go, and I stupidly complied and followed him. It was fine at first. It was a toy hauler, so the back end was like a U-Haul that stayed open. The first guy put on an album I previously loved as a teenager, but now can barely listen to, tucked me in and left. I didn't see his buddy at this point. Fast forward God knows how many hours. I've been tripping out to this music when they got back. First thing was, the guy that had told me that I looked like his little sister climbed on top of me while I was half conscious, kissed my neck, and began touching me. Then I felt the second one, and his hands. I was still so high and out of it, but immediately told them to stop, that I wasn't in the place for that. They got angry, and the one who had gotten me there was the most frightening. I saw his eyes change in that moment, and I knew I was fucked if I couldn't get away. It didn't matter how high I was, I needed to get away from them. I don't even recall formulating a plan. I remember the main man saying, "We helped you, now you owe us," and slamming my knee into his groin. I may have forgotten that he was on top of me at this point. All I remember is running for my life into the prickly bushes, not knowing where I was, but desperately running away. The second man seemed a bit nervous about the whole thing and didn't do much except touch me, while the other held me down with the weight of his body. I met a couple of kind souls that calmed me down when I completely freaked out, crying, covered in dirt and thorns, and they gave me a safer space. I didn't sleep that night as I could no longer trust kind strangers, but I also couldn't find my camp. It was 10 yards away, as I discovered the next day. To the men who tricked me, trapped me, and would have done something inevitably bad to me, let's not meet again, and also fuck you both. Edit, I forgot to add this, cause it's a pretty intense memory for me, but I'm pretty sure the only reason I got away was because they were on something too. I hadn't even met Guy 2 before, so I don't know about him. But the one I did seemed crazed and very amped up and high and out of it. And yes, I know the whole thing was stupid of me. It was not even a month into 21 though, with very little life experience. My youngest son is autistic and 5 years old. It's very obvious that he's autistic. He constantly stims with his hands, rocks back and forth, and doesn't respond to communication. He's a Gestalt language processor, so he repeats catchphrases that only I can understand. For instance, he will say, "Widdle wobbles," when he has a hole in his sock. Saturday, I took him and my daughter, who's 8, to the park. A man, probably in his mid to late 30s, was there, with who he said was his niece. Her and my daughter headed off, so he came over to talk to me. My son was in his own little world, but playing on the equipment from time to time, and he hits himself on the head, so I constantly redirect him. This man asked if my son was autistic, and I say yes. He then asked me, when was he diagnosed? I told him at the age of 2, almost 3. He asked me if he was in regular classes or special needs. I didn't answer him right away because I'm getting uncomfortable. He can tell and responds with, "I think my nephew is autistic and he's 3. So I let my guard down a little, which was the wrong decision. I tell him he's in a special needs class. He asked me what school because he wants to know options for his nephew. I hesitate and tell him the 4 schools in the district that offer special needs classes, not specifying which school my son goes to. Then he asked if my son runs off a lot. I just reply sometimes. He notices a GPS tracker on my son's ankle. He asks how well that tracks him and if he ever tries to take it off. At this point, I realize this is not a conversation I want to have. I tell him I'm not comfortable talking to him about this anymore. He responds with, "I'm concerned about my nephew." I tell him that not all autistic children are the same and that he should get him evaluated. I call my daughter over, who's upset because she's having fun with a little girl, and pick up my son and we go to the car. I'm watching him as we leave and he's just staring at us. My daughter asks me why we had to go, and I tell her we have to go home to do stuff around the house. She's very intuitive and asks, "Is it because of that girl's stepdad?" I ask her why she thinks he's her stepdad, and she says that the little girl told her that he was her mom's boyfriend. I ask what else she said about him. She tells me the little girl said, "Tom likes to talk to girls like your mom, and it makes my mom mad." I then asked if there was anything else, and she tells me that the girl said that she was glad she met my daughter because she's the only child and doesn't get to play with other kids except at school. She also tells me that the little girl asked for her phone number and wanted to see her again soon. The man was lying to me. For what reason, I don't know. I can only assume to make it seem like he was single. Could be more sinister than that. I have no idea. I immediately call the police and tell them everything. They get my info and said they're sending an officer to the park. By the time the officer got to the park, a couple hours later though, they were, of course, gone. I give the dispatcher a description, the man and little girl's first names, and what I think he was driving since it was just us there, so I assume it was his vehicle in the lot. They tell me that they'll call me if they need any more information. Lesson learned. I'm almost certain he took advantage of my willingness to help another autistic person to try to get information about my son or about me. Update. The man has been found and arrested. My brother shared my story with his friend, who's a sheriff deputy in the county to the south of me. They had got similar reports about a man matching the same description. One report included him allegedly trying to lure a disabled toddler away from his mother at a trampoline park. They had video and his license plate at this time. My brother's friend sent me this guy's mugshot and asked me if it was the man. It was. He was investigating the trampoline park incident, but since it was in a different county, didn't know of my report until my brother shared it with him. I asked about the girl that was with him, and he couldn't tell me anything other than she's safe. They arrested him in a county almost 2 hours away from me yesterday. I found out his name and looked up all his charges. He had warrants in states north of me for so many things, including stalking, violating a protective order, and child endangerment, and new charges due to the trampoline park incident. Since nothing technically illegal happened in my situation, he won't have any charges brought up against him, but my story may be needed for the case. I'm not a lawyer or law enforcement, so I don't know specifics on how or why, but maybe to show a trend in his behavior targeting disabled children. When I find out more, I'll update here. Parents, trust your instincts. I know some comments think I went too far calling the police in this case. I'm confident now that I did not. Who knows how many times he may have done this, but it went unreported,